I think probably most of you know that I grew up in the evangelical Christian world, and while I'm no longer among their ranks, I hope that I still carry some of the best of that tradition within me. But last week I was interested to see that the flagship magazine of evangelicals, Christianity Today, posted an editorial saying that President Trump should be removed from office. Did anyone else see that in the news? Well, I was surprised to see that. They took this risk of alienating so much of their reader base, given the depth of evangelical support for the president. And I glanced briefly at the comment section following the editorial, and I saw many that were in support of it, but I also saw the expected outrage and subscription cancellations. Who wants to hear political opinions you disagree with? I can only imagine the conversations over evangelical Christmas dinners this year. Politics preoccupies us, and I've heard many of you express your own anxiety about the president, our nation, the upcoming presidential race. It's enough to sap the magic of the holiday spirit right out of you. But if you're looking for an escape from politics, I'm sorry, but you're just not going to find it in the Christmas story. Here's how Matthew begins. Now the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place this way. Right off the bat, in just that first sentence, Matthew has already brought politics into the Christmas story. Messiah. Messiah is a political word. It's a Hebrew word. The Messiah is the heir to the throne of King David. That's why the angel calls Joseph son of David, so that we make no mistake. The Christmas story is a political story about God coming to save the world. And politics, of course, means conflict. On Christmas Eve, we'll hear the very next verse that follows today's reading. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. In the time of King Herod. Christmas comes to the world not in an era of good government with wise elected public servants in charge. Christmas comes in the time of King Herod. A paranoid man is in power, ruthless, narcissistic. He engages in secret plots and schemes to try to destroy his political opponents. You just can't make this stuff up. Now, we'd like the story to continue this way. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, behold, there came wise men from the east to preside over impeachment hearings in Jerusalem. But Christmas doesn't come to the capital city. When God comes to be with us, God does so in a way and in a place where no one expected. As a baby, vulnerable, needy, demanding attention, born in a barn and cared for by a couple of nobodies. This whole story is meant to turn our notion of power upside down and reveal the true nature of the power of God that comes in humility and among the humble. I've heard this story every year of my life, and it's still hard to grasp. You can only wonder at it. The Christmas story is political, but it redirects our attention away from the source of whatever our political anxiety is. At the first Christmas, it's Herod. This Christmas, well, feel free to pick your own source of anxiety. Christmas redirects our attention to a different reality at work in the world that is greater than your fear. God with us in the birth of Christ. Now, if God really is with us, then there's more going on in the world than meets the eye. There's more going on than political corruption, than impeachment hearings and presidential debates. If you've read the fairy tales of C.S. Lewis, he called it deep magic. A deep magic is at work in the world. Now, our culture gets this to some extent. We long for deeper meaning to life than just buying stuff. And despite our education and technological advancement, we still want to be enchanted. That's what all the cultural trappings of Christmas are about. And so last Saturday, our gym was full of parents, many who don't go to church at all, but who still brought their children to meet Santa Claus. In contemporary culture, Santa represents a return to wonder and to magic. A time in your childhood where you could still hear a sleigh bell ring. I didn't grow up with Santa. Now, it's not because we were evangelicals, but because we were Swedish. We always opened our presents on Christmas Eve. And when I asked my parents, why don't we open our presents on Christmas morning like all of these families I see on TV, the only answer I ever got was, because we're Swedish. That's what Swedes do. So the tags on my presents always said, to Jeff with love from Mom and Dad. And I knew I was getting a gift not from a jolly old elf, but from two people who loved me and who took care of me. I was also the youngest of my three siblings, and they were very happy to tell me the cold, hard facts. Santa didn't have a chance. Although I didn't grow up with Santa, I still grew up, though, with an enchanted life. My parents lived in a world that was enchanted not just at Christmas, but every day of the year. We lived in a world that was pulsing with the life of the Holy Spirit. We lived in a world that found its meaning in being loved by God. And every day of our lives, we were never alone because we knew that Christ, Emmanuel, was always with us. There was always some deep magic at work, always more going on than met the eye. The first time I ever sat on Santa's lap was, I guess, just 7 years ago, right here at St. Paul's Church, at Cookies with Santa. And after 300 other kids had sat in his lap, Santa left his dirty red laundry up in my office. I considered it a privilege. This year, however, Santa went home feeling sad and woebegone. He said that as he sat in his neglected corner of the gym, he gazed wistfully at the long line of children lined up to see Elsa the Snow Princess. I won't repeat what he said about her. He just wasn't his jolly old self afterwards. Disney marketing had stolen some of Santa's magic. It wasn't always that way. Our choir reminded us 2 weeks ago that Santa Claus descends from an actual real person, Saint Nicholas. And any magic that Santa has is a remnant of the true deep magic of Saint Nicholas, God's love at work in the world. Nicholas was enchanted by love. And so he gave up his wealth to give generously to the poor. He was outspoken for justice. He was also at the 4th century Council of Nicaea, that great church council at which our ancestors affirmed that Jesus Christ is truly human and truly divine, God with us. Now, the ancient church affirmed that belief about Christ, but they didn't explain it. Theologian Stanley Hauerwas remarks that you can't explain the incarnation any more than you can explain creation itself. You can only wonder at it. That in the incarnation, God has come into the physical world and so has brought the physical world up into God. St. Paul said it this way, Christ fills all in all. So now even ordinary tap water in which we are baptized carries God's Spirit. And the bread and wine that we eat at communion carry the presence of Christ. The whole earth is full of the glory of God. Because on Christmas night, the glory of God was revealed in the face of a baby. The last week of October, St. Paul's gave me a gift. Thank you, St. Paul's. It was the gift of sending me on a retreat, and it was a retreat explicitly for UCC clergy. And when I went there, I could see that many of the pastors were exhausted. They were anxious about the many things that pastors get anxious about, our churches, our ministries, our personal problems, politics, our tendency to take care of other people but not take care of ourselves. Well, at the very first session, the woman who led the retreat reminded us of that familiar graph that has 4 quadrants. I often use it with couples preparing for marriage to help them with making decisions. If we were a PowerPoint church, I'd have the screen come down right now and it would be up there, but you'll have to imagine it. So the vertical axis has not urgent up at the top, and the bottom of that axis has urgent. The horizontal axis has important on one side and not important on the other. So there are 4 quadrants, and up in this quadrant of not urgent and not important, it's trivial matters, like the junk mail that you get. And below that, you have not important, but urgent. And that's pretty much everything going on in your cell phone right now. Next to that, you have urgent and important, so it's time to call 911. But that last quadrant are things that are important but not urgent. Important but not urgent. And the retreat leader said to us, for the next week, that's where you're going to be. All you're going to do is spend time on what's important but not urgent. And so we spent the next few days focusing on the things that we often neglect: our physical health, our financial and spiritual well-being. We hiked, we prayed, we listened for God. We went to worship services where we didn't have to lead the worship service, something that pastors rarely do. All we had to do was show up and just be. We spent time on what's deeply important for our well-being as human beings, but that we often neglect because of the tyranny of the urgent. I think of how in my lifetime there are so many more ways for what is urgent yet unimportant to distract me. That cell phone in my pocket with its incessant notifications, bzzz, text messages, social media, 24 hours of breaking news alerts, streaming TV that urgently progresses from one show to the next before I have time to grab the remote and so, okay, just one more, and then I'll finally get some sleep. On the other hand, what truly feeds our souls makes no demands on our time. Reading, going for a long walk, making music, cooking, learning a new language, wondering, pondering, praying, coming to church on the fourth Sunday of Advent. Whatever feeds your soul and makes your heart sing, whatever helps contain your anxiety and keeps you grounded, rooted, and hopeful as a human being. The truly important things for life are seldom urgent. And of course, it's not just on the personal level. Funding pensions, health care, educating our children, mentoring at-risk youth, workforce development, caring for creation. All of them important, non-urgent needs that we neglect until they become urgent. 2 weeks ago, we lost a member of our congregation who consistently reminded us of what society was neglecting, who consistently reminded us to care for creation, Nancy Brandt. I saw her 2 days before she died, and it was good to spend time together and thank her for being my friend. As I was about to leave, we both shared words of love for one another. Now, Nancy and I were very different theologically, but she had been one of my St. Paul's mothers. And she said, I guess if there's something good about the end of life, it's how much we say, I love you to each other. And then she added, I wonder why those words, why don't we say them more often to each other throughout the rest of life? I love you. Christmas ultimately is about love. It's the love of God that is at the heart of the Trinity, coming to us in human vulnerability to be with us. That's the only way love can come, in vulnerability. Christmas is entirely God's gift of love. And unlike Santa Claus, God loves to give gifts to naughty children. There will always be Herods that urgently demand your attention. But Christmas draws us into a different story about the world and invites us to let go of our cynicism and be re-enchanted by the love of a God who is determined to be with us. Now, a lot of preparations are happening right now. I've heard Kevin rehearsing the Vidor Toccata, and it sounds great. The choir is rehearsing their anthems. Candles are going to be lit. The acolytes are practicing all of their parts. Sarah's getting ready for the family service, and Matt's probably working on his sermon. And I don't know what all of you are doing at home, but there's so much work going on right now to get ready for celebrating Christmas. But despite all of that, Christmas asks nothing from us at all. It can only be received with empty hands. That's why we have a do-it-yourself Christmas pageant for children on Christmas Eve. There are no parts to rehearse. The shepherds, the magi, everybody just shows up and stands around the manger. Martin Luther said that the manger scene is simply the church, gathered for worship with Christ at the center. Worship is the most important, non-urgent thing that we do, because what we worship determines who we become. So this Christmas Eve, come ready, come expectant, and do nothing more urgent than gaze into the manger and be re-enchanted by love. Amen.